Thank you, Jenny. And thank you for all participating in your interest in the Innovation Fund and Innovation Ventures. Um, as you can see on this slide, we're all about our acronyms. And I don't mean to spend time on every piece of this. You can, read the points on this, but I do want to point out several aspects on the slide. The first is um, that our goal is to find homes for ideas that deliver maximum impact for Cincinnati Children's and the greater good of our patients, really on an idea by idea basis. And what I mean on that is it's not all our ideas that come to us are multi-million dollar blockbusters, and that's fine. We work as tirelessly on the ideas that we may be able to license out and get a return of $25,000 as we do on the $1 million or multi-million dollar ones. Second is that you see the blue line kind of 3/4 of the way down the page. And that really kind of indicates a true handoff of ideas to our office. Above the line is really the time from idea generation to an idea being commercialization ready to be licensed out. And our office is there to lend support to you as the PI or the investigator or the idea generating faculty member to help provide guidance along the way and render assistance at a number of different points along that pathway. And then at a certain point when the idea really becomes ready to be licensed out, that's when we really take over and start working to get those out the door and be licensed. And not all ideas that come to us become products, and that's fine. And because sometimes we don't know, and many times we don't know when those ideas come to us whether they're commercializable or not. Sometimes the ideas that come to us at the idea generating stage, we may think this is going to have great potential, and 3, 4, 5 years later, as those ideas come to fruition, we realize there's no market for them. And some of those ideas who we think this is a real flyer become great ideas and great companies. And that's why we ask for everybody to bring us your ideas and early in the process, and we can help move them along and see if they are really commercializable at the end or not. And the other piece of this that I kind of really want to point out is that in many instances, or in most instances, the time period from an initial idea generation to commercialization could be 5 years or longer. Some of ideas that have really become commercializable and blockbusters in our institution have kind of spent 5 to 7 to 11 years in our in that maturation process. And then one other thing that I want to make sure of to point out is the idea that it's important for ideas that when they come to us early so that we can evaluate for patent or other intellectual property protection. Because if ideas are published without that protection, in most instances, then they really can't be commercializable. Our partners who we license them to just aren't willing to take the time and effort and investment needed to get them to market if there's no patent protection. And so just a couple examples of some licensing successes, and they're kind of all over the board. GeneSight became AssureRx, but as you can see, it took over 11 years from that first idea to being licensed out. Barrage Bio, that is a repurposed AstraZeneca drug that was licensed out to a different company. Again, that was 5 years in that maturation process. Clarigen, that's a digital example, again, 6 years. But then we have Pear, where it was only 13 months. AeroSelf, we've been working on it 6 years. It could probably be a startup within the next year. And Curome, which Dan Starsnowski, it was his idea that became a startup, and he'll talk a little bit about it later. It was 7 years in the maturation process. So we're glad you're here participating, and we're excited for your ideas to be disclosed to Innovation Ventures.
Great. Thank you so much, Abram. So I want to talk to everyone this morning about the Innovation Fund. So it started in 2012, and we have funded 68 awards to date. The Innovation Fund bridges the gap between research and company creation or license. And the projects we fund show strong commercial potential. To elaborate a bit on that, the Medical Center requests Innovation Ventures seek discoveries that could, one day, become products that improve health. But these are also products that would be marketed for sale. So something that could be implemented for use at Cincinnati Children's only, with no intention of being used outside of Cincinnati Children's, would not be a good fit for the Innovation Fund. Rather, a technology that could be licensed someday to an external entity is a more appropriate fit. And as we go through this presentation this morning, I want you to think about that as well as the information we're going to share. If you have any questions, please pose the question at the end of the session. As you can see on this slide, the Innovation Fund is a two-phase application process. It starts with short letters of intent, LOIs, which are due to me by noon on Monday, February 8th. Second, invited applicants are required to submit proposals to me by noon on Monday, April 5th. So is your project eligible? The intent of the Innovation Fund is to help enable product development or commercialization. And we accept proposals in 5 categories: biologic cell and gene therapies, diagnostics, digital health and care delivery, medical devices, and small molecule therapies. Some examples of ways to use the Innovation Fund include proof of principle early concept design, unmet need or market validation, a biomedical engineering consult, customer discovery or market research, prototype development, initiating beta testing. A few others that aren't on this slide might be large animal studies, or perhaps pre-IND studies such as PK, PD, or tox. Ways the fund cannot be used are for travel to conferences or presentations, preliminary pilot data to apply for other funding, health services and implementation research, published content such as guidelines, best practices, or training manuals, or solely funding work within an institutional core. Those are things that are not eligible for Innovation Fund funding. About the budget, Innovation Fund projects generally have a budget around $100,000, but we really look to the PI to only request what is needed. No more than 15% of the total budget can go towards PI or co-I salaries. You can use money to pay for RAs or people in the lab, but this is not intended to fund PIs and co-Is, so no more than 15% of the total budget for key personnel salaries, and no large items of equipment. To talk a little bit more about the two-phase application process. As I noted earlier, you want to submit your LOI to me by email by noon on February 8th. You can download the LOI template and instructions from the Innovation Ventures page on Centrelink. LOIs are brief. They're limited to 1.5 pages. LOI applicants will be notified by the end of February if they have been invited to submit a full proposal. And as noted earlier, proposals are due by noon on April 5th. Additionally, applicants will be required to pitch their technology directly to reviewers at the end of May. And as I alluded to earlier, our Innovation Fund review chairs are Drs. Rashmi Hegde and Dan Starzanowski. About the LOI requirements, within that 1.5 pages, we're going to look to you to note the project name and the PI name. The unmet need, in other words, describing the unmet need or problem. For example, the disease population your innovation will solve or address. The innovation, describing the innovation and plans for ultimate clinical utility. The scientific premise and rigor. This is where you briefly describe the strength of your research, and if possible, include hyperlinks to papers. The key development, milestones, and success metrics. Where is the project most likely to fail? What activities or experiments, if unfavorable, would kill the chance of project success? Here's where you propose how you will use Innovation Fund dollars to identify points of possible failure. And lastly, we want you to include a brief description of the PI and the project team. If you are invited to submit a full proposal, you will be asked to include bio sketches at that time. Some key points to remember. I'm kind of drilling this into you, aren't I? But the LOI template and instructions are on Centrelink from the Innovation Ventures page. We're going to notify all LOI applicants by February 24th. Invited proposals are required to include a letter of support from the PI's division director. If you are invited to submit a proposal, we will provide you with feedback on that proposal in the form of strengths and weaknesses by May 7th. This will give you ample time to prepare for your pitch to reviewers. And as I alluded to earlier, applicants will be required to pitch their proposals to reviewers at the end of May. We will notify all applicants in mid to late June. We anticipate funding and kickoff meetings in July, and thereafter we will schedule quarterly check-in meetings between the awardee and Innovation Ventures. We are honored to have two partners in the commercialization journey, Drs. Rashmi Hegde and Daniel Starzanowski. This is their first appearance as co-chief scientific officers, and they have unique perspectives in the journey as they are both innovators and are on the journey themselves. I will turn the floor over to Rashmi to share her perspective of the Innovation Fund as a reviewer, followed by Dan, who will share his perspective as an applicant and an awardee. We will then open the floor for Q&A. Remember to submit questions to me via the Zoom chat. Rashmi, I turn the floor over to you.
So I will be brief here. Review of the proposals goes through the protocol that Ginny referred to. What we are looking for is validity of the science and the rationale. So it needs to be based on strong scientific and clinical rationale. I apologize for the phone. I have to ring at this moment in time. sorry. Clearly, because this is funding with a commercialization endpoint in mind, that it has to have protected IP space so that you should have disclosed this to Innovation Ventures. And there should be some room to protect the idea. We are looking for feasibility, both scientific feasibility for what you are proposing, as with any scientific project that you would have, as well as market availability. There has to be a market for the idea. It cannot be purely fundamental research to get at first principles. Clear steps and a pathway to market. That is, you can't be doing preliminary studies or a fishing expedition, if you will. There have to be clear steps elucidated in the proposal that tell us how these steps will take you to market or make your property licensable or otherwise move it out of Children's Hospital. We do consider mission. It doesn't mean that every property that you're looking at, every intellectual property needs to make $1 bazillion. If it meets a Children's Hospital mission, this is also valid. And one unique aspect of the review process here is the pitch. And this gives reviewers an opportunity to ask applicants questions and applicants the opportunity to address anything that they had not addressed in their original submission. So although this pitch is extremely short, I think it's 4 or 5 minutes, there is time for Q&A. And this is extremely valuable to the reviewers and to the applicants, I think, as Dan will tell you. Without belaboring this, I'll take questions later if you have any, but I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thanks, Rashmi. And so I'll give you just a very brief perspective from my point of view, which is, as an applicant and a previous awardee, I've gone through 2 rounds now of the Innovation Fund application process. The most recent one was in this last cycle, in the last fiscal year. The first one was about 2 years ago, I believe in 2019. As intended by this fund, the resources provide crucial funds to fill in gaps in the project that typically aren't covered by a traditional R01 grant, and it's helping to move that project forward to a commercialization endpoint. And so for the specific project, we were seeking funds for, it was to optimize even further small molecule derivatives we were interested in developing. So the first project, as Abram mentioned, was licensed out of Cincinnati Children's and formed into a new company, a spin-off company here in Cincinnati that is hopefully moving closer to the clinic. So in terms of the process itself, it's really rather straightforward. The LOI step is, isn't overly cumbersome. And then beyond that, the full application, again, asks for relevant information that most of us already have on a given project. In the interim, after the application process, we receive comments, and these are comments coming from CSHMC faculty, various experts in the field, VCs, biotech scientists, and so on. And each one offers a slightly different perspective, and this obviously aligns with their expertise and their lens as they're looking at this project. And it's the same group for the most part that's providing the written feedback as you will encounter in the pitch if it's selected for that next round. And so I spent a lot of time reviewing those comments and really trying to understand what they're asking for, particularly in preparation for the pitch. Again, it's no secret that a lot of the questions that do come back in the written form do get discussed in the in-person pitch. And so the pitch itself, again, I've experienced it in two versions. One was the in-person, which was the first time around, and then the more recent one is in a virtual format due to the COVID restrictions. In some ways, the virtual one was a little bit easier and perhaps a little bit less intimidating than standing in front of a room full of thought leaders and defending your idea, but both fun to participate in and particularly helpful to receive that feedback and have an ability to discuss it outside of sort of your normal circle of expertise. And sort of just into the formats, obviously you heard from Ginny, it's a very brief 5-minute pitch followed by questions and answers. And the pitch, follows a very strict, formula, and I've used sort of the same structure both times, which is, again, presenting a very brief background into the team. And for my project, we had multiple investigators, each with their unique expertise relevant to the project and what we're hoping to achieve. Also, this was an opportunity to present my research background and how it relates to the proposed project. As many of the reviewers I didn't know personally, and I wanted to give them a little bit of context as to what we work on. Also, providing a little bit of background on the disease that we're studying and the unmet need. And then followed that, the background with, how we propose to address this unmet need, the scientific premise behind it. In my case, it was a small molecule project. So, I was describing what this novel molecular target is. And again, this is, as Rashmi was mentioning, has to be based on sound and rigorous research. Again, a little bit on how we were proposing in a novel way to target this molecular target. And for us, it was a new class of small molecules derived from a screen. And then just a very high level overview of some of the preliminary data, the key data points that supported this scientific premise. And, then we present sort of the innovation behind it, or the value proposition, if you will. And again, this is based on sort of, in my case, based on a new strategy to improve the outcome of a disease through a novel targeted approach, discussing the new intellectual property that can come from this project, and as well as the platformability. I was focused on a very specific disease, but I wanted to be sure I can articulate how these efforts actually might apply to other diseases. And so that required a little bit of homework. And then lastly, in sort of very specific key developmental milestones and metrics, describe, if funded, how would we actually use these funds? And this takes some planning and thinking and discussions with, experts in the field as to what is really needed to move this project to closer to a commercial point. And some of these next steps were actually guided based on the reviewers' comments and what they were asking for. As I mentioned, some of it was based on discussions with experts that can help move this project closer to commercialization and exit from Cincinnati Children's. And so for me specifically, as again, this is a small molecule project, so it was focused on improving the drug-like properties of a small molecule we identified in that screen. And again, as I was proposing these series of experiments, I was keeping in mind that what a commercialization path looks like, and how these specific experiments will indeed increase the value of the program to make it more attractive to external partners. And sort of after you do this pitch, and then you entertain some of these questions and have a discussion back and forth with the reviewer panel. So nothing to be scared of. It was relatively straightforward process, and obviously seek out Rashmi, seek out me about this process. We can provide our feedback, also talk to the portfolio managers, and identify the resources that are available on the Innovation Fund's website and on Centerlink. So feel free to also check with Ginny. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jan and Rashmi. And I am pleased to say we already have a few questions, and this is a friendly reminder to everyone to use the Zoom chat feature. So one of the first questions we have is, can a significant portion of the budget be used for work performed in a core or CRO to support a project being led by a Cincinnati Children's lab, clinicians, or staff member? And I'm happy to answer that. The answer is a resounding yes. You can definitely use your budget for those things. And thank you so much for posing that question. Another question I see is, can funds be used for large animals? And I had indicated that yes, they can. And so a person's asking, could it also be used for in vitro or small animal experiments? And Dan or Rashmi, I don't know if you would like to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, if it makes sense, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, if the project is funded, when an applicant proposes milestones, if the project is funded, could these be changed based on feedback from the reviewers or pivoted based on data that comes in? I'm happy to, or Dan or Rashmi, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I think that there's an iterative process to the milestones and ongoing discussions with the portfolio managers for feedback, but also with Rashmi and I. So, pivoting if necessary, is acceptable and important sort of process, to move a product to the next phase. And we've sort of talked about always finding the killer experiment, which is finding the key experiment that prevents it from moving forward. And that's in some ways the goal, which is not always an academic exercise, but it's important when we're thinking about moving a technology from the bench to a point of commercialization.
Great. Here's a good question. How close to completion does the scientific product have to be? I have a PI who indicates they have a protected idea, but there is a fair bit of research that could be done. What are your thoughts? Rashmi, would you like to tackle that one?
So it really, actually, to be completely honest, it depends on the portfolio that particular year for the Innovation Fund, because we have funded all kinds of things in the past, things that were very far from commercialization and things that needed 1 year of obvious experiments to be completed. So my recommendation would be to go ahead and put in an application. You have nothing to lose. And the best thing that could happen to you is it gets funded. The worst thing that could happen to you is you get some feedback. So it's hard to say without knowing the particulars of projects. But if it's a protected idea, there's a clear market and you know how to get it there, put it in.
Great. Excellent advice. Thank you so much. Another person has asked about the proportion of applicants that have been funded in the past. And so I'm happy to tell you, on general, in a given year, of LOIs submitted, about 69% of them are invited to submit full proposals. Going back to the LOIs submitted, we average about funding 38%. So I hope that information is a little bit helpful. Another question I see is, can a postdoc apply for this grant? Or is it only eligible for a PI or faculty member? Now, I have some thoughts on this, but I would like to hear from our co-chief scientific officers first. And so, Rashmi, would you like to tackle that, or Dan?
Well, it depends on who owns the IP. So if the postdoc is applying for independent IP, I mean, it really depends on the circumstance. Usually the IP is held by the lab in some combined fashion, and Dan might have thoughts. And can the project be conducted independent of the PI? Are there resources? Is there space? Is there children's support for the postdoc to function independently. So this is not a postdoctoral grant by definition in the classical sense. This is a translation grant for a particular property. Was the property, the intellectual property, developed by the postdoc prior to coming here? Or is this something that's part of their postdoctoral research project in the lab of a PI? In which case, who owns the IP? It comes back to that.
Excellent answer. Thank you. So I have a question, and I have to admit I'm going to ask the person who posed this question to give me a little bit of context, because the question is, generally, who are the sponsors for these awards? And so I'm not too sure by what you mean. When I think of sponsor, I think of the funding entity. So in this case, the funding entity is the Innovation Fund. Funding for the Innovation Fund comes from the hospital. So if you can elaborate a little bit as to what you're looking for, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, it was me, Jenny. And, you know, I'm typically used to sponsors being outside, you know, like UC or NIH.
Oh, no, yeah. So thank you, Brett. This is the Innovation Fund is an internal funding mechanism. And very graciously, the hospital provides funding for this initiative. But I should tell everyone, even though it is an internal funding mechanism, proposals, LOIs come to me, proposals come to me. When projects are awarded, at that time, the PI works with their business manager to put the proposal into EPAS. But one does not have to use EPAS at the beginning. Since it's an internal award, we use EPAS at the end. Okay, so another question. Can the same proposal be supported by extramural funding? And I think I'm going to, if you don't mind, direct this over to Dan, because Dan, if you don't mind, I recall your project, you've had internal funding, NIH funding, et cetera. So if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the answer is yes with an asterisk. And the reason I say that is obviously it can't cover the exact same set of experiments, but as with many of these projects, it requires different, you know, funds from multiple sources to carry out different critical aspects of the project. And you know, the Innovation Fund resources are really geared to increase the value, which could be, again, work done at a CRO, or it could be done through various partners or in the lab, again, to increase the value of that intellectual property. And so you can have other funding through other sources to support the general aspect of the project. And typically that happens. I mean, and, you know, in my case, you know, we're studying, you know, a specific pathway-specific disease that's funded by, you know, NIH funding. And, you know, we then identify, you know, projects within that might have commercialization potential or a strong IP, and that would sort of, we would seek additional funding to move those down the path of commercialization. So the answer is yes, and again, it'll be context dependent, and it can't necessarily cover the same set of experiments, but you know, the Innovation Fund can support that project that's funded by another source.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. Another question we have is, in order to apply for the fund, do we need to create a business entity or get some kind of partnership with a business entity, like what SBIR or STTR requires? And so thank you so much for that question, but no, you don't need to create a business entity prior. As we alluded to early on, ideally, with the Innovation Fund, we're going to help enable product development or commercialization. And so ultimately, the goal is that the technology is going to be licensed to an external company, or as in the case with Dr. Starosianowski, perhaps a startup will be formed. But when you're applying to this, no, you don't have to partner up with an outside entity. So I hope that answers your question. And I want to briefly point to the slide I have on the screen, I have a variety of names on the slide. John Brophy, Karen Lammers, Reed Smith, Matt Wortman. These are innovation ventures, expert portfolio managers in the various asset classes. And they are key sources for information as well. Or you can always send an email to me with general questions. I have another question I see here. Must the scale of the project match the funding cap? Or may I apply for a smaller project if I need initial market validation or consulting? And this, if you don't mind taking this, is an excellent question. So even though we can fund up to 100, please, we really want people to only request what is needed. And in the past, we have funded projects at the 25K level. So if you only need a small amount of money, please feel free to submit an LOI and an estimate for what it might need to get some market validation or consulting. So hope that is helpful. Any additional questions? I don't see. I'm going to give it a few moments for additional questions to come in. And I'm not seeing any. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen this morning and really thank our co-chairs for their invaluable input. I would like to turn things over to Abram Gordon to make some final comments. Abram. Oh, Abram, you're on mute.
I did read something in the New York Times, I think over the weekend, of how many times people say you're on mute during any one of these Zoom calls. It was like through the roof. But I wanted to thank you and Eileen for all your work in putting this presentation together. And thank you for all people on this call for their interest in innovation and commercialization. And we're really looking forward to getting your ideas in and running them through the process and seeing what happens. So thank you.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. We really hope you will submit some letters of intent by noon on February 8th. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact our office. We are here to support you. Thanks, everyone, and have a fantastic day and Happy New Year.